I get so concerned when people say, oh, but he conquered Mount Everest. I don't think we ever conquer any of the natural elements. I think we are privileged to be able to spend some time there. Share ourselves with those great elements. And so we arrived in base camp, and base camp for a lot of you would imagine it's quite a busy place, but on the north side of the mountain, it's not that busy. It's quite spread out, in fact. And in the foreground of the slide was the Chinese expedition. And in 2007, they were practicing. Now, you don't go to Everest to practice anything, but they were practicing for this year, 2008. They were experimenting with this torch that they were hoping to be carried from the south side of the mountain up onto the summit, down the northeast ridge, and then on the way to Beijing. And of course they were hoping that this torch would burn with only 30% of the air and oxygen that you and I are enjoying, wind speeds of 100 kilometers per hour plus, and temperatures of minus 40 below and colder. Well, there's been lots of debate about the torch, and there's lots of concern about what's been happening in Tibet, and we don't have time to talk about that. But that was the Chinese expedition, and we were positioned back from that beneath a place known as Memorial Hill. This was a site that George Mallory in the 1920s had pitched their tents. And the routing up the mountain is exactly the same. Nothing has changed in 85 years of being on the north side. And having been through the military in South Africa, for those of you who may have some understanding of our background, you know, we were at war with, I'm not quite sure who, but we were for a long, long time. And so, having been to the military, our tents are those that you see on the left-hand side in a nice straight line. I figured that if I was going to be the leader of this expedition, we were going to pitch our tents in a nice straight line. With no disrespect to the Australians, I don't know if there are any in the audience, but these are the Aussies over here. The Aussies over there, and those are the New Zealanders back there, by the way. Sorry, Brian. Looking ready to do the haka or something. No, I joke. I mean, we shared time with the Australians and the New Zealanders because everything comes at a cost on Everest. And we shared medical support and communication support and weather support. Absolutely vital. Something that you realize when you get into base camp is that, again, and I say by your standards, maybe not that cold, but when you're in a two-man tent on the ground, on this frozen ground, minus 20 is a pretty chilly place to be. And suddenly you start having to do things a little different, particularly at night. You know, this is when you've climbed into this nice warm sleeping bag. There's no ways you want to get out of there to go and do your ablutions. Sometimes you are forced to do that, but if it's just to make a wee, best just do it in the tent. I don't mean in the tent. Don't get ahead of me. You make use of something. You know, us guys are fortunate. I mean, we can make use of what is known as a pee bottle. Guys, you can choose the size to suit yourself. Ladies, I won't embarrass you what you use, but please, if you want to come and ask me afterwards how that works for you, I can give you sort of a detailed description. So, yeah, you stay inside, and you know, and so what happens is that your water bottle, when you leave the mess tent at night, it's great to have a nice hot water bottle. You can put it into your sleeping bag, and it keeps your feet warm. What else goes into your sleeping bag is anything that's got a battery, camera, satellite phone, any equipment that is needing to be powered, because batteries don't like the cold. So you lie there at night and you've got all this gear in the bottom of your sleeping bag, water bottles and all sorts of things. And of course, if you have made use of a pee bottle, the natural thing to do is to want to put it outside of your sleeping bag. But of course, in the morning, what's going to happen is for 4 or 5 hours, you're going to have this bottle of frozen, solid, yellow liquid. Much easier, just put it into your sleeping bag so that in the morning you can do the noble thing, get out and just sort of quietly go and empty it behind your tent or whatever. But if you can imagine, you know, You've kneeled and done your thing at midnight, and then you get thirsty at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and you can't find your head torch. A real problem. And I must tell you, there have been many mountaineering stories of guys drinking out of the wrong bottle. Can you imagine that? I chose the most ugly pink bottle that I could find because I knew that in the dimmest of light, there's no ways that bottle I would be drinking out of. And so we spent 4 or 5 days in base camp. And the important thing about spending time at altitude is that you want to start acclimatizing. A very critical part of climbing any big mountain. You know, if you could miraculously take a climber and put all the best of equipment on them and actually position them on the summit of the mountain, they'd be unconscious in 3 or 4 minutes and dead half an hour thereafter. So acclimatization is vital. It's when your blood starts thickening and it starts becoming oxygenated as you move up. And so once we'd spent 5 or 6 nights in base camp, it was time to start moving up the mountain. And you can see this jet stream plume blowing off the summit, and it blows at speeds of 200 kilometers an hour. And of course, it's a jet stream plume. I mean, this is where jets fly. We're just under 9 kilometers high, 8,848 meters to be exact. And what we're hoping to do is to get our acclimatization out of the way so that when the winds drop, which is for about 3 or 4 weeks, if we're lucky, in May, we can hopefully sneak up her flanks and stand there, hopefully, for a few minutes. And so we moved up, and of course this presentation doesn't allow us to go up the mountain, come back down the mountain, continuously doing that. But we did that for 7 or 8 weeks, constantly up and down the mountain, because something that you learn on a big mountain is that in order to climb high, you need to sleep low. And I think that's a great message for life in many ways, is that in order for us to be able to perform at our best, sometimes we need to do what you guys are all doing now, ladies and gentlemen. You're taking some time out to perhaps reflect on your business. You're smelling the roses. You're not at the coalface. Because I think that a lot of us, we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we never take that time to just reflect. What is it that we're doing? What are we busy with? And so one learns that on the mountain, is that to actually be able to perform at your best, you do need to sleep low. And so we did that many times. And as we moved up the mountain, we had a series of camps that we would occupy. We had a base camp, we had an intermediate camp, and we ultimately had an advanced base camp. And this is advanced base camp. And this is where the real serious climbing begins. We're at this point at 6,450 meters above sea level and getting a little less than about 50% of the air that we're enjoying now.